Welcome to Between the Before and After, a podcast about the stories that shape us. I'm your host, Coach John McLernan, and each episode I bring you an inspiring guest with a moving story that shines a light on the power of the human spirit. Before we dive in, I want to let you know about two very important things. Number one, the stories shared here are often gritty, raw, and vulnerable, and very likely will include speaking about sensitive topics suited for a mature audience. Number two, this podcast is also broadcast live on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. So on whatever platform you follow myself or Freedom Nutrition Coaching, you have the opportunity to participate in this discussion. You can comment on the live stream, and we encourage your participation both by commenting and asking questions. And so this podcast is about exploring the stories that take place between the before and after photos, not just in the realm of weight loss, but in all areas of life. So let's dive in. All right, I'm excited about today's podcast, maybe partly because I've actually taken a little bit of a break prior to this. You wouldn't know because I haven't had a series of episodes scheduled, but I haven't done any live videos for a little bit over a month. So I think what a fantastic way to kick off reigniting my live broadcast. So I've got with me Melissa Bright, who lives up to her name and has really embraced that despite having a very difficult past. So Melissa, after losing her mom at the age of 25, would really spend the next 10 years of her life struggling and not knowing how to process everything she went through. And, you know, in 2020, she decided, I've had enough of this. I'm ready to make a difference, not just in my own life, but with others as well. And so while starting therapy for herself, she actually started thinking about what can I do in my life that gives me a sense of purpose and meaning. And so now she puts joy back into people's hearts with her podcast, The Bright Side of Life. And I've had the pleasure of being interviewed on that podcast. And she talks with people who have successfully navigated their way back to joy and happiness despite their struggles, pain, and grief. So I wanted to actually have the opportunity to do that with her and flip it on the head. So I'm the one asking the questions now, and she's the one telling her story. So I'm super excited to have you here, Mel.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so excited to be here and to be on this side of the coin.
Yeah. So let's dive right into the story here. So you lost your mom at the age of 25. And if you don't mind sharing a bit about that, how did that take place?
Yeah. So I always start it back to the first part, which was I had my daughter at 16. And that
Yeah.
plays a big role in the fact that whenever you have your child at 16, your mom, if you have your mom at that time, really becomes your best friend. At least she did for me. There was no more secrets hiding anymore. And she just became my support system. She became my best friend. And my daughter was absolutely in love with her. And my daughter was 10 at the time, and my mom got a diagnosis of COPD, which was chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder, more than likely from smoking a lot of her life. And unfortunately, that took her within 8 short months. I know people that live with COPD, for years. Unfortunately, that wasn't her case.
Yeah.
And that was really hard and really devastating. I've always asked myself the question of, I knew that my mom was going to pass away, and living, like, knowing that, I don't know which one is easier or harder. If it was a sudden thing, but it wasn't any easier knowing.
Yeah. And I think that's really powerful that you share that, because there's this idea that if we knew the future, we could somehow prepare ourselves for it. But I think maybe that weight hanging over you for all that time just feels like this heavy thing. And maybe every interaction, in a sense, is colored through this lens of, maybe is this the week that I lose my mom? I don't know. Yep. And so you live with that uncertainty because, generally speaking, we get to live with quite a bit of, a degree of certainty. Obviously, the world's been shaken up a lot. Right. But we've come to expect at least some degree of certainty. So here you are wondering, is this, so when it took, only 8 months from the diagnosis to the time of her passing, did you have any anticipation that it was going to be that short time span, or what was kind of running through your head?
No idea. I really, really did think that I was going to have her longer. But she was hospitalized within four times in that 8 months, and every single time it was because her lung collapsed, and you have to get a tube put in your lungs, which is what my mom said it was the most painful thing in her life, and she wouldn't do it again. And she made the choice to go on hospice. However, that's probably the doctor saying, your chances aren't looking good. But I really did think that I would have longer with her, because we were told 5 years, 10 years, people deal with this all the time. But I think I was a little naive. I didn't think it was going to get as bad, but when you would talk to her on the phone and she could barely get out a sentence without sounding like she ran 20 miles, you just have to like know that it's not going to be
Yeah.
a longer than a month or 2 months or something. So, yeah.
Yeah. And depending on whether or not you feel like sharing, but like how did your mom navigate this sort of in what turns out to be like the last months of her life?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and it's a question I don't know, and it's bothered me. The one thing I do know is my mom tried to make amends to me. I think maybe a month before she passed away, saying, "I'm sorry for everything that happened in your life." And if you want me to be completely honest, I truthfully pictured my childhood as a good one with my mom.
Mhm.
She
Yeah.
she was a single mom. She struggled, but she tried to make me as happy and give me everything that I wanted within her means that she could. And so when I looked at my childhood at that time, like I didn't think anything bad. So I'm like, "Mom, why are you apologizing to me?" Um Now I will say it is something that I had to work through in therapy, was wondering what my mom felt for those last 2 to 3 months that she knew she was gonna go, on hospice. Like, I didn't have that conversation with her. I'm
Mhm.
sure probably my stepdad did, because that was his wife. I just really felt so sad that that was a heavy burden on her, for her to know that she was gonna pass away. But we didn't really talk about it. When I was with her, we tried to make fun times. Like our last meal,
Right.
we
Yeah.
made homemade meatballs and spaghetti, and we went all out and did everything. We didn't talk about the sad stuff.
Yeah. What comes next? And maybe I could ask then, you've had a lot of time to go through some therapy and some reflection and so on. And if, and obviously we can't do it again, but in hindsight, would you have maybe talked about some of the sad stuff with her while she was still with you?
Um, Knowing what I know now, yes. Being 36 years old, yes. Going through a whole everything that I have, and I'm 6 years old now, yes. But at 25, however, I thought I was like had all my crap together, I did not. Um,
Yeah.
I don't know that I was just knowledgeable enough to even ask like this stuff. I didn't even know. I knew she was bipolar. I knew all these things, but I didn't fully understand and know what all that meant until many years later. So going
Right.
back, yes, now with all the knowledge in my pocket and know how mental health really does affect you, and realizing that she was carrying a lot more stuff than I could even ever realize, absolutely, yes, I would.
Yeah. So, and maybe in a sense, she kept a lot hidden from you,
Right.
hoping to spare you from some of the pain and the suffering that she would have struggled with in terms of mental illness.
Yeah.
And then if we may ask, is mental illness something you yourself have struggled with as well? And what's that been like for you?
Yeah, so mental illness definitely, I've struggled with it. I struggled with it when I lost my mom. After that,
Yeah.
before that, I was pretty happy. The only other thing that I dealt with that I do feel like was traumatic was the way that my dad treated my brother and I. Talked down to us, was very demanding. Nothing was ever good enough. So I guess like losing my mom was my biggest tragedy.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and then I suffered from anxiety, like really, really
Yeah.
bad anxiety after I lost my mom. Um,
Yeah. I actually can't imagine. I would like to say I can imagine to a degree because I've experienced anxiety myself. But uh, I think the thought or coming to the place of realization where I don't get to sit down with her at the table. I don't get to have a conversation with her again. Like, and so what was kind of running through your head in those moments? What were you experiencing, and how did you cope?
yeah. So for my anxiety, it really took me a long time to pinpoint what was happening with my
Yeah.
anxiety. And I actually just wound up telling another friend this was I was with my boyfriend, who I'm still with now, and I was trying to have him understand what my anxiety was like, because he didn't understand it, and I wanted him to make him understand. And so
Yeah.
I kept asking myself these questions like, why is this happening now in this particular time? What's happening? So it took me 7 years to figure out that my anxiety would come up when things were so great, when life was so great, when the moments
Right.
of we're sitting down at dinner and it's me, him, and my daughter. We're out in the RV camping for the weekend. It was the times that we're creating great memories that I became scared because I realized that I was scared that this was all going to be taken away just like my mom was taken away.
Right. Yeah, you answered my next question, because and that was sort of the dot that I was maybe going to connect there. So
Yeah.
the inability to truly appreciate what you presently have because of the fear of losing, or not really the, I shouldn't say the inability to not appreciate it, but maybe the fear of, if I get too emotionally connected to this,
Yep.
it's going to hurt too much when I let this go, or if I have to let this go, and I'm not sure that I have the strength to go through that again.
Yeah. I was told today on another interview, it's called foreboding joy. Like you're waiting for the next shoe to drop or just trying to prepare
Yeah.
for when anything else bad happens. And that is what happens. And
Yeah.
I don't want that to happen. I don't want those great moments for me to be living in the past. And so I'm really trying to work on that. Really.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, in a sense, I can understand, because I know with anxiety that the hardest part for me was almost exactly that, when things are calm and you go, when is this going to come along and ruin it? That's
Yep.
the biggest struggle. Now, from the time that you lost your mom, was there a time that you kind of went into therapy, or was it something you avoided for a period of time, maybe not understanding or not thinking it was necessary? What was that kind of journey like for you?
Yeah, so I didn't avoid therapy. To be completely honest, I was a single mom and I couldn't afford therapy. I couldn't.
Yeah, yeah.
And so one time, this was in 2020, was me and my daughter started watching this movie, Fried Green Tomatoes, which was a movie my mom and I watched when I was younger. I thought I would be fine. I was not fine. All these memories and emotions started coming flooding back, and that was a night that I texted my boyfriend because I was almost shameful that I was this upset 10 years later, like missing my mom. And
Right.
he's
Yeah.
like, "We have got to get you into therapy." So I didn't start therapy until 10 years after I lost my mom.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, finances come into play, and I mean that's maybe a
Ugh,
separate conversation around sort of the how we take care of our people and how we take care of mental health in our society. And I know you live south of the border. I'm from Canada. You live in
yeah,
the U.S., and so it's a little bit different there as well. But even making that accessible to people, because and then let alone removing the stigma around it.
right.
It's like we treat therapy like I'll when my house is on fire, then I'll call the fire department, kind of
Yep.
thing. And I wish we could have a because I've been deliberately using the phrasing mental health versus mental illness.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I would actually love to have conversations around mental fitness as well. So to speak
Yes.
about it in other terms, because it's not such a black and white issue where it's like either you're perfectly mentally healthy or you're perfectly mentally ill. Well, perfectly mentally ill is a thing, but it's not a black, it's a spectrum of experiences, even within somebody who experiences trouble, challenges with mental health. It's a whole spectrum. There can be good days, bad days in between, and so on. And so really wanting to kind of change that conversation. So was it that you didn't go to therapy until you had the means to do so, or it was like, this is the end of the line for me, there's no other option for me?
Both, because at that point, my boyfriend, we had combined income, so we had
Mhm.
more, and he had seen me. He had brought it up a couple like times in the past, and I was just like, no, no, and like truthfully, I was a single mom and I couldn't afford it, so I didn't want to tell him that. Like I was kind of embarrassed.
Yeah.
And like you said, it is like one of those last things you maybe get done because it's an expense that it's like, well, I'm not going to die, but maybe mental health, like that needs to be something that is a priority. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And Leslie just commented here in the live, mother loss before 26 is rough, and it sounds as if because of the mental illness, there was almost like a double abandonment, and
Oh
I can
my
only
gosh.
imagine how tough that is. And
Yep.
yeah, thank you, Leslie, for sharing. I really appreciate that. And maybe more importantly, we could also say, let's say you share the fact that you've lost your mother, and then somebody comes to you and they're like, well, gosh, I don't even know what to say in this moment. How can people approach or broach the topic around a loss like this? And I know it'll be individual, but maybe how would you encourage people?
Yeah, I would say that I know that there's no like perfect thing to say. Just know that the people that are that have lost aren't looking for a perfect answer. It's not like, oh my God, you said this and now I am great. Thank you.
Right? Yeah.
Just share your condolences and I mean, I'm even awkward with it sometimes too. And I'm like, I've lost two parents. Why have I not like figured out what to say to people? But you just don't, and it's just, sharing compassion and just letting them know that you're sorry that this happened and that you can be there for them if there's anything that they need. I actually just talked to one of my guests the other day, and he shared a great tip. I mean, he lost his wife to cancer, and he said, "Don't ask me what I need. I don't know what I need in this moment. Just give me what you can, just whatever it is that you want, do that." And that's what it is great. And
Yeah.
that's kind of
Yeah.
just help them in any way that you know, and they'll be thankful.
Yeah, couldn't we say like so because I wonder if like in our culture we have this, other cultures around the world, maybe older cultures that have been around for a longer time, they have quite a process, maybe even a community-based process around grief and loss and mourning, and they go through rituals and they have periods like
Yeah.
there's a lot of that where we've like completely disconnected from that in our culture, and maybe because of our prosperity and the quality of life that we generally enjoy in the Western world, we've kind of become disconnected from death and loss in the way that it was very real, even for like maybe our grandparents' generation, or it's we live almost like a sanitized, idealized existence in our mind, and then when we get hit with something like this, it's like,
Yeah.
how do I cope? Because I've never had to really face up to that.
Yeah. Well, it's also, you said it, is people don't, they themselves are uncomfortable with it. So they don't even know how to approach you and to talk to you. And all I can say to that is it is okay. Like, it is okay to be uncomfortable. These aren't situations that are just going to be the most comfortable thing ever, but that's better than maybe not even saying anything.
Yeah.
There's a person that lost her husband, and I very much regret not saying something to her, because it was going to be through Facebook, and I wish I would have, because I was really upset, that she lost her husband, and I didn't, because I was uncomfortable. Um, and it's okay. It's okay. It's okay if it's
Yeah.
uncomfortable. Just do it anyway.
Yeah, I think maybe even this fear of the uncomfortable emotions,
Yes.
and I've turned kind of on this a lot. Like, how do we cultivate a sense of resilience to uncomfortable emotions? And a little bit about my own traumatic past, and
Mhm.
and that really messed with my head, and I fell into like binge eating food addiction because that was me not having the capability of processing or facing up to the emotions. And so I imagine, and it's like you just mentioned it in passing, but just over a year ago, you also lost your dad.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I mean, talk about it. Like, now, that experience, did that bring up? I have a number of questions around this, but like, did that bring up some of the same feelings that you had around losing your mom, or did you feel as though, I don't know if you could say, if you were better prepared for this, even though it came very suddenly as a surprise?
Yeah, no, completely opposite. This was a complete surprise. My dad went in for a double heart and then kidney. It was either kidney or liver transplant. Same time, operation was happening immediately. Heart transplant and then liver, kidney. I don't remember which one. Um, we do know that there was risk involved, but I was not made known to like the depth of what how risky this is. Yes, I know it's heart surgery, but my dad and my stepmom were not telling me anything, like, but he did call me the day before he got into his surgery, and I knew why he did, in case it
Hmm.
would not go right. I know exactly that. And everybody said it's going to be okay. He's going to be fine. He's going to pull out. Um what was so devastating about this was I did not have a relationship with my dad. He for whatever reason was very emotionless, just wasn't in my dad or in my brother and I's life.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I held on to that for a really, really long time because I thought something was wrong with me. He just moved back to
Yeah.
the state that I lived in, not even 6 months before he passed away. I was so excited that I was going to get to have a relationship with my dad now. As soon as all this COVID crap was over, I was going to be down there, driving down there to see him. So when
Yeah.
I found out he passed away, I was grieving everything we never had and everything we were never going to get to have, which was completely opposite of my mom. I had
Right. Yeah.
everything with her. And so it was different. And it was really, really hard for me to wrap my head around that.
Did you feel as though you had some tools to navigate this though this time around?
Yes, I was in therapy at that time. Thank God I was in therapy at that time. So literally like that Wednesday that happened. And to kind of put even like a more of a magnitude on it, the series of events that happened was I lost my grandma on a Sunday on January 3rd. Found out my dad died on Thursday and went to my Thursday night and went to my grandma's funeral on Friday morning. So
Man.
in a span of like it, I was just like, God, what are you what are you doing? It was
Yeah.
crazy.
And that's a very fair question to ask, because it's like how much can one person go through or tolerate with these experiences? Now, would you say that having gone through this, I think we even hide from grieving
Mhm.
because there's this fear around like the depth of emotion that we're going to feel, and as though I don't have the capacity to be in the presence of that depth of emotion, if I could put it that way.
Yeah.
Going through the depth of grief that you have, what have you learned about like your own resilience and emotional strength?
Yeah. So, well, one thing I've learned is that I don't know if I always want to be strong. I feel like that's what I tried to do forever. And that can really turn into compartmentalizing stuff and not dealing with stuff.
Yeah.
I want to feel. I want to feel my emotions.
And I love that you said that, because I have this thought of like redefining what strong looks like.
Yes. Yep.
So, because when you're saying I don't always want to feel strong, when we say that, maybe there's this idea that being strong looks like not showing emotion or being a stoic in the face of loss, or you know where in fact, like going to that place where you just break down in body heaving sobs, or like that's genuine strength, because you're in that place. You're not hiding from that place with a demeanor of being strong. You're actually in that place. And so I wonder if we could maybe even redefine what it means to be strong, because that lifts this burden maybe of expectation on us as we're going through an experience like this. Being strong doesn't look like being stoic and suppressing emotion. It means going into that place, because there's only one way that emotion comes out.
Yep. Yep, that's such a great point. And that's the stigma that's around mental health and therapy these days. Oh, if they go to therapy, they must be weak. If they are this, then they must be weak. And I'm like, no, 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 no. Like if you have been through even a percentage of what some of these people go through and that are in therapy, like you would understand. And that does not make them weak. And I just love that you said that strength can be, it takes much more courage to deal with the emotions and sit with them and be uncomfortable than it does to, and I'm not bashing anybody, but to pick up a bottle or resort to drugs or whatever it is that
Yeah. And in a sense, we could say those behaviors make sense, and we don't mean necessarily those behaviors are good,
right.
but it's this, again, I go back to this fear of I don't want to go to that place
Hmm.
because I'm afraid if I go there I won't get out.
Yeah.
Did you ever have that fear?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know.
I know that's a tricky question to ask.
It is a tricky question. One thing I do want to say though, that I saw somebody post on Facebook today and it resonated with me. I posted it on my stories actually, it was something about like you can either cry for the next 90 seconds or you can cry for your whole lifetime. Kind of meaning like, why don't you just sit with your feeling and like
Yeah.
whatever you're feeling, get over it. Cause like usually sometimes I'm not an expert, but like these emotions of like madness, like you'll have like really, really like 5 minutes of just being so pissed off. And then it's like, okay, I'm over that. Like, if you sit
Mhm.
with that, then it'll be good. Like, not maybe great, but just sit with it now so it's not, I'm telling you, 10 years.
Festering, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't process my mom's trauma for 10 years, and that had debilitating anxiety when I could have dealt with it and moved past it.
Yeah, and I will say I think I like the phrase like move past it or move through it versus get over it.
Yes.
And I know why you use that phrase because we do use it so commonly.
Yeah.
But I'm so so accustomed to listening to my clients' language and saying
Mhm.
we might want to rephrase that because I think, and this is not a criticism of you at all, but
Yeah.
it's the idea that you're going to get past it. I imagine you still grieve your mom,
Yeah.
and for the rest of your life, you will grieve her not being there, and because you have this special moment with your daughter, like maybe your daughter's graduation, or things like that, and she doesn't get to be there to share with that, and you will grieve that.
Right.
And so maybe we could even let go of this idea that this is something we get over. It's maybe something we learn to live with and we learn to navigate. I don't know if that's a more accurate way of describing it.
Yeah. It's perfect. It's perfect. Because you don't let go of the grief necessarily. But it doesn't have a hold of you,
Yeah. Okay. I like that. Yeah.
which is huge because and rightfully so. I'm not saying if this has happened, it's bad or it's wrong. It's very understandable, but I think there comes a point in people's life they're just like, oh my gosh, I do not want to live this way anymore. How can I get better? And I
Yeah.
truthfully
Yeah.
think the first step is feeling whatever it is you need to feel.
Yeah, absolutely, and I love that again. Leslie shared the recognition that loss doesn't fade away with time like smoke. It's not necessarily something you just get over,
Right.
and I think we could even again. I think about moving past. I was about to say getting over, but moving past the guilt. Maybe we even feel, or the shame we feel. Is something wrong with me that this many years have passed and I still feel pain?
Right.
And I think, well, no, it's a recognition of how important they were, how impactful they were in your life, how much they meant to you, and how much the depth of love you felt for that individual.
Yeah.
And so it would be, I don't want to say wrong, but to not feel like grief. After I think I've heard it described, and why I'm asking is because I really, for example, I've lost my grandmother. I mean, I don't have any grandparents, but most of my grandparents I really had very little relationship with because they were either passed before I was born or lived far away from me. So I really only had one grandparent that I had a relationship with. But and her funeral was actually on my 22nd birthday. But I wasn't actually sad because she'd had a full life.
Right.
And I mean, for 9 years of my life, she lived in a basement suite in my parents' home. So I just got to cherish her going through my teen years, being able just to go downstairs and hang out with grandma. And I recognized her quality of life was gone at the time that she passed. And so I really didn't feel a lot of sadness around that loss. But I was also maybe 22 and not all that emotionally mature. And so interesting, I think now, as a 40-year-old, I would probably feel that loss more.
Right. That's a good perspective. That's kind of like going back to, asking like, what would you say something to your mom now? Would you talk to her? Yeah. Now that I have the emotional intelligence of a 36-year-old and not a 25-year-old. Yes.
I have the privilege of still having both of my parents with me, and even better, they're actually moving to my province, and they're going to live 2 minutes away instead of 10 hours drive away. And
That's
so
awesome.
I'm so excited because as you know, I have a young son who's just under a year old, and so he's going to get to have some grandparents because my wife being from Australia, though her parents haven't been able to come over. My brother lives in Turkey, her sister lives in Switzerland. Like, we're spread out all over the place, so to actually have family close. And I think I've really made a point, and maybe it was after I went through my own trauma that I really, it took 30 years for me to actually begin to appreciate my parents.
Yeah.
And really even get to the place where I would openly tell them that I love them and appreciate them.
Yeah.
And I felt like I spent like the last 10 years just trying to make sure that I express my appreciation for them, to make sure that they know, because maybe for the first 30 years of my life, especially as a very independent, pig-headed male, that like, I was like, I'll call you if something's wrong kind of thing. Don't worry about me. Like, now I'm a parent. I'm like, I can't even imagine like now, like if my son's like, don't worry. I'm like, yeah, right.
Right. Yeah.
The amount of love that I feel for this little human being is like unbelievable.
Yeah.
So
that's how I felt like also, like when I lost my mom, of course, like I appreciated her then, but then when you get
Yeah.
older, like now that I don't have all those things, like simple things like mom, what was that amazing chili recipe, or how
Right.
do I do my
Yeah.
taxes, or anything, like all this stuff that I didn't have from my mom that I did not care about when I was 25. Like I don't care about a chili recipe. Like
Mm-mm.
I care about now that I'm older and I'm, have my own little family. I lost my train of thought. I was gonna say something.
Well, I had a question for you as well. Because your daughter would have been 9,
Yeah,
if I got
9
that
or
right,
10. Yep.
at the time of, So how did you help her get through that?
Yeah. So that one was rough. I will say things kind of changed. Her dad was in the military
Mhm.
in Germany, and he had just moved back to Colorado. He was in Germany for a really long time, like years and years. And actually, whenever my mom passed away, her dad had asked, like, "Do you think I could have a chance now to raise Trin? I know you're going through your stuff, and at that point, the only reason why I would hold on for like selfish reasons. I didn't have a reason to be like, no, you're not a good dad.
Right,
Don't
right.
think you'd take care of her. It would just be for purely selfish reasons. So quite quickly after my mom passed away, she wound up going to live with her dad. And she was actually there for 3 years. I would see her like in summers, holidays, and stuff like that. She wasn't there for like the forever
Mm.
3 years. Um, so I didn't really see um, her deal with a lot of it. Um, and people ask me this question, a lot. And I know now, like she's told me like she doesn't really remember her a lot, which like makes me sad.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but we always talk about, and my stepdad, is still very much in our lives, and he always talks about the relationship that they had together. Uh, but
Yeah.
I wasn't really there a lot with her.
Yeah. And I think part of the reason why we ask these questions about, let's say, your past experience, and I really want to reiterate how much I genuinely appreciate your willingness and openness to share, because there's so much value from other people.
Yeah.
I think we're looking for, can I learn something from your experience?
Right.
You know,
Yep.
and
I
so,
Go
oh, go
ahead.
ahead.
Sorry.
Well, I just say, like, because I kind of want to shift gears here, because we've done lots of sort of digging and excavating, and got some really like valuable nuggets and whatnot. But you run a show called The Bright Side of Life, and having gone through like so much like painful loss,
Hmm.
you're still able to have this perspective on life, this bright side of life. Now, I might preemptively say, I don't believe you're suggesting that everything is sunshine and rainbows every single day of your life.
No.
so so what is the bright side of life then, and how do you maintain in the face of all this?
Yeah. So I'm going to be 100% transparent. And I'm going to tell you that before, and I think I might have told you this on my last podcast or our podcast, but for a really long time, was really pessimistic. I lost my mom. I was a single mom. I was struggling. I sometimes was in this victim mentality that
Mhm.
life isn't fair. And why is the universe against me? And why am I always struggling? And so on and so forth. And my boyfriend has the complete opposite like mental mindset than I do. He is always like super positive. He can figure out anything, and I just wasn't like that. And I didn't like that about myself, and I wanted to have a better mindset. So, um when I started my therapy, like I said, I started my therapy in 2020. That's when I also started my podcast, and
Right.
I wanted to think about life. We have these real things happening in our life that we cannot sugarcoat. Social media, we can try to not post about them, but there is real stuff going on in people's lives. And I want to talk to people about those real conversations, but then how they ultimately were able to find their path back to the bright side of life, whatever that means for them.
Yeah.
For people, it could be you know, became sober after a drug addiction, or I lost 100 pounds after dealing with trauma, or, losing your parents, whatever that trauma is, or the bad pain, struggle, whatever. I wanted to help other people feeling alone and what that means to them and see what that does like for people. I like to paint that picture and see exactly what that looks like for different people.
Yeah. I love that. And I imagine that there's almost a therapeutic value for you, because conversations like this, like there's those that are listening to this conversation, but you and I are engaged in this conversation actively. And as you're sharing some of your story, like, I'm an empath and like I feel it, and I'm like, I want to hug you, because I'm like, oh my gosh, I just want to provide you some comfort, even though you're doing amazing in all of this. That's kind of the natural response. And so I imagine that as you navigate these conversations with other people and the things that they've overcome, that there's a therapeutic element for you to be connected to another human being and sharing in their experience.
There is, I would say, besides therapy, that my podcast is the most therapeutic thing I have ever done. I have talked to people from all walks of life, from so many different stories. I try not to have the same story on there, and to get to hear how people have found their joys and how they went through this. And I ask really hard questions just like you do. And I'm really all about painting this picture. Like, we can say, okay, go meditate, or okay, go feel your emotions. But what did that look like for you, John, on a Tuesday when you were really sitting with your emotions? Were you actually sitting in a chair like this, or were you out walking with your dog and just being mindful? Like, I want people to know what that looks like for them, because they can't ask us right now. Like, well, technically
Yeah.
they can, but so I want to ask people, what did that look like? How did you sit through your grief? So then people are like, oh, that's what I can do. Okay.
Yeah. And I've heard it described, and I can only say I've heard it described because I haven't experienced this myself yet. And I say yet because I understand I'm going to experience some loss at some point in time in my life that is quite significant. But that it just comes and goes in waves. And maybe the waves over time are a little bit more spaced out, but they still come. And so if a wave of grief, comes at you, how would you navigate it now versus maybe 5-6 years ago?
That there is going to be grief and loss in our life, and that life isn't fair and nothing is promised. Like, I was this naive person thinking that my parents were going to live till 1,000 years old. Like,
Yeah.
why would they be living any less than that? But I don't want to be in this negative mindset. But I do have to accept that we cannot be at this peak of just happy all the time. That there are ebbs and flows of sadness and grief and joy, and then there's loss, and there's all kinds of things. And I just have to accept that, because if I don't accept it, the anxiety is going to take over, and I'm going to be waiting for this other shoe to drop and be like, what can I fend off so nothing bad happens to me? I just need to accept it, and to know that it is, and to enjoy life now in the present.
Yeah. And maybe I might suggest, like, my thought on this is that, because we often hear the phrase that life isn't fair. And I might say, well, maybe life is absolutely fair because it's the ultimate arbiter of impartiality. In other words, you know what? Good things happen to bad people. Bad things happen to good people. There is no distinguishing
Right.
in the human experience. Because I would agree that, like, for many, many years, like, because I went through some other, like, really difficult experiences in life that I won't go into detail here, but I definitely wanted to set up camp in that pity party, set up a tent, and I wanted to drag other people into it, go, life, this isn't fair. Why is this happening to me? And so I've worked really hard to learn how to reframe those feelings. Like, what can I learn from this? How can I grow? And it's not an easy thing to do, but I think the ability to look at it from another perspective and say, maybe if I stop having such a self-centered perspective, like, as though this is how I expected my life to go. This is what I deserve in life, because and it's like, well, really, who says I deserve anything?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, yes. And something that is really eye-opening for me is I have a 19-year-old right now. She's very much not used to uncomfortable, I guess, and kind of sometimes is like, why is this happening? Or everything has to be perfect. And I don't mean to say that in a bad way, but I'm just trying to prepare her as much as I possibly can to know, like, Trin, life is not always fair. Not everything is going to go your way. Um, and that you have to be okay with that in some scenarios, that some things are just out of your control and you cannot control them. And so that's been a huge part of this, because she is watching me as a role model and as her mother. How do I deal with everyday challenges if I'm have a crappy attitude and a negative mindset? What do you think she's going to start doing? And I already see some of my bad qualities that I had before have kind of already rubbed off on her, and now I have to try to fix those.
Well, so now I think that's an interest. Of course, everything's interesting to me, but I you talk about trying to prepare her for, life and the things that are going to come her way. And, I think I have maybe a slightly different perspective than I would have before I was a parent.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, okay, like, as much as I would like to save him from the hard experiences, and right now it's really simple things like I'm trying to learn how to walk and I tumble over.
Right.
And as much as I want to like run over and catch him so he doesn't experience that, it's like, could we say like pain's a bit of a teacher?
Yeah.
And he needs to go through those experiences to feel that pain. First of all, maybe to learn, okay, this is not a good idea, but also to learn that, okay, I can experience pain and I can come back from that.
Right.
And so my thought of preparing him for life is not necessarily trying to shelter him from the hard experiences, from the tumbles and the falls and things like that. Obviously, I'd like to shelter him from unnecessary ones, but I would like to equip him over time with the resilience to be able to be able to go through these difficult experiences rather than prevent him from having these difficult experiences, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. And there's not a guidebook on because I don't want to enable her and I don't want to do everything for her and I don't want to shelter her from everything. But then there's some stuff I do want to help her with. And it's just like, there's got to be like this happy medium,
Yeah.
Our thing right now is she was just trying to find this perfect job, the perfect hours, the perfect boss, the perfect customers. And I'm just like, Trin, there's not, you're going to have an issue with something at some point, and you're just going to have to find a job. You gotta make money. And I don't think it's easy for her to hear me kind of being hard on her sometimes, but if I just tell her that everything is just going to be rainbows and, oh yeah, keep looking for that perfect job, she's going to be sadly disappointed. So it's choosing what we shelter them from.
And I think, for example, while waiting for that perfect job, go and get one right now and learn more about what you like and don't like. Because maybe what you think is a perfect job right now, you're going to discover actually it isn't.
Right. Yeah.
So
that's very true.
Yeah. So, I mean, of course, it's easy for me to say as I've never met your daughter, like just to be like, well, 11 months into parenthood, I have all this experience to share with you. Let me tell you.
It's okay.
But, your own journey isn't complete. And I think it's important, and I love that you're open about sharing even that, because again, people hear my story and think the journey is complete. I'm like, oh no, the struggle continues every day. And I don't say that to be discouraging. I say that but if we shape, or if we have this expectation that, okay, I got to this point in my life, therefore my journey is complete, we're setting ourselves up for even more unnecessary pain. But when we accept, like this struggle is going to be with me for my life, and I accept that and I make peace with that, it doesn't mean the struggles are easy, but now I'm not having this expectation shattered repeatedly because somehow I have this idea that the universe should conspire to make life perfect for me.
Yeah. That's exactly what it is. If you think about how many people say, I'll be happy when. I'll be happy when I have that job. I'll be happy when I have that man. I'll be happy when I have that house. You are setting yourself up for so much failure, because happiness is an emotion. Happiness isn't May 12th, 2023 when you get to go on your dream vacation. Like, do you know how many days are between now and May whatever date?
Yeah. May 12th, 2023.
Yeah, like make it today, this present moment. Like, be here and enjoy these moments and not have expectations. I've had many expectations and I have been disappointed many times when I shouldn't have. I was the one that put the expectations on there when I shouldn't have.
Well, it's really interesting because I'm right now studying to become a meditation teacher to add another tool into my toolkit of working with people.
Yeah.
But we often, and one of the things we just recently covered was meditation versus mindfulness. And kind of, we often equate the two as the same thing when they're not. So,
Teach me. Tell me. What's the difference?
well, in a nutshell, I would say mindfulness is becoming aware of our outside environment. So it's
Okay.
becoming aware of like what's happening around us and whatnot, whereas meditation is going inside and looking
Okay.
at what's happening in our internal environment. So mindfulness might be like I'm looking at this, like this food that I'm going to eat and I'm going to experience, and maybe it's a slice of pizza, and I ate my pizza with a fork and knife because a former binge eater, I never used to do that.
Yeah.
And so now I'm like leaning over, just smelling my imaginary pizza. But so being physically present with this sort of outside experience, being present with maybe the people that I'm sharing a meal with and so on, like that's mindfulness. Whereas meditation is about going inside and saying, okay, what's my internal world looking like? And what am I experiencing in there? And it's really interesting because we have this idea around meditation, or maybe some people do. One, maybe you have to be a monk in a monastery and in the high
Right.
mountains somewhere, or that you have to be able to have a completely blank mind, or be able to, it's like, no, meditation is sort of messy and imperfect like everything else.
Right.
I've developed a little visualization, for example, when a thought comes into my head, I can wrap it in a bubble and float it out of my head.
Yes.
So I don't have to chase it down the rabbit hole, but I can't stop my brain from having thoughts. So,
Right.
but it's it's a really cool tool as a way of sort of helping people become more present, as cliche as that sounds, but really because we live in this world of this paradox. It's like this never ending now. Things are coming at us rapidly, and it feels like this nonstop impossible stream to consume.
Yep.
So how do we get present? It's like, well, we kind of have to maybe disconnect from all that's happening around us, and
Yes.
like in the virtual world, and really get connected to exactly what's happening in our present physical world in our immediate vicinity.
Yeah. I love that you just taught me about mindfulness and meditation because I'm doing both every day.
Yeah.
I practice a gratitude journal.
Yep.
Write in that every day, and then after my workout, I'm doing like 10 minutes of meditation, and that makes great sense about like external and internal.
Yeah, I was like, that's amazing. I was so excited
Yeah.
when I made that connection. And, gratitude, I'm really glad you touched on that, because when you think about, again, ways to navigate loss and sort of what life looks like going forward, our brains are hardwired to look for negativity. And that comes
Yep.
from a very primal survival brain looking for what are potential threats lying ahead of me. And so we have this inbuilt negativity bias, and it's not a bad thing in a sense. Like, it's not good or bad. It's just how we are.
Right.
And it's probably helped human beings survive. But what that means is we now live in a digital world that is constantly like feeding into that stream of negativity. So
Yeah.
we maybe went from an 80% negativity bias to a 90 or 95% negativity bias, because that's what we're being fed on a daily basis. So to practice gratitude actually rewires our brain. And
Yeah.
neuroplasticity is a fascinating subject, but it teaches our brain to start looking for reasons to be happy, or to experience joy, or to experience appreciation. And if we want to overcome that, it's like everything, it almost becomes cliche after a while, like having a gratitude journal, but there's real genuine value in doing this because of how it reshapes our brain.
So I love that you brought up the cliche about the gratitude journal, because I challenged myself when I started. I started my journal back in October, and I said,
Yeah.
write down all your normal things, your boyfriend, your daughter, your puppy, your house. Then you have to name some things that you normally wouldn't say. Like literally, oh my God, I'm thankful for this ring light that the lighting's good, or I'm thankful for this warm cup of coffee. I'm thankful for my gratitude journal. And when I started doing those little small things, and I asked myself, I'm like, what would your life be like without this? Like without my wireless mouse or without this microphone? Like think of all the small things that you can be grateful for that are in your life that you don't normally think about. And that really challenges me. And I
Yeah.
love it. I love it. I just asked myself, if you didn't have that, what would your life be like? Maybe not like horrible, but maybe an inconvenience. So
Yeah. That's amazing. So you had like a really powerful experience with this in a sense.
yeah,
And I think going through this and being consistent in this practice has probably shifted even your perception of gratitude. And I wonder if you now have the ability to kind of look around and go, wow, there are a lot of things in my life to be grateful for in this moment.
I try so much because, like I said, for so long I was in this pessimistic mindset, and I didn't want to be there. I wanted to, and once again, the mindfulness really helps you stay in the present. And I don't want to be stuck in
Yeah.
the past and thinking about all my loss, and I don't want to be in the future wondering what's going to happen or what am I going to lose. I gotta have something that's going to ground me and keep me here. And I love it. It's one of my favorite rituals. Every single morning, I have my little puppy dog next to me underneath the blanket with
Yeah.
my cup of coffee, and I write down 20 things. I try to do as much as I
20.
possibly can.
Wow. Yeah.
I line the whole thing up. I do those small things. Those small
Yeah.
things add up.
They do. And I mean, I've seen some of your posts because you post photos of it on your social media channels. And speaking of which, to wrap up, because it's been, obviously we could keep chatting. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I really appreciate your time. If people want to connect with you because they want to learn more, they want to go, hey, I could use a little more bright in my life. Where do they find you?
Yeah, they can find everything at the brightsideoflifepodcast.com. If they want
All
to
right.
do episode or podcast or any of my socials, it's all right there on the website.
Awesome. And we'll include that in the show notes as well. If you could leave people with one takeaway as we wrap up, what would you like to, what nugget of wisdom would you like to share with people?
Yeah, I would say show gratitude and look around you and just find those small things that you can be grateful for, because that will really, really keep you in the present and think of everything you do have instead of everything you don't have.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Between the Before and After. If you've enjoyed this episode, please like, share, subscribe, or leave a review, because that helps this podcast to reach and inspire more people. I love exploring the stories that take place between the before and after, the powerful experiences that shape who we become, and I love human potential. I love the possibilities that lie within us. So whatever you may be up against, I hope these stories inspire you, because if you're still here, your story's not done yet, so keep moving forward.
Anyone can come from any place of brokenness and destitution and build an amazing life.